Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Francesco Corti, and I am product evangelist from Alfresco. I apologize because we have had technical problems and we are a little bit late, but Google Hangout this afternoon doesn't seem to support us. So we experienced some technical problems. In any case, okay, thank you, Angel, from the RC channel for the feedback. So everything seems to be solved, even if we are late. So again, thanks for being here. Together with me today, we have Ole Hejlskov, product manager for the digital developer platform. Good afternoon, Ole. How are you?
Good afternoon. I am good, and we do apologize for all the mess with the YouTube Live and Hangout. I see that we still have 17 people on the old
oh wow.
Waiting for it to start, so we do apologize for that if you're watching the recording or if you are live now. But anyways, so we're 15 minutes into it. Francesco, do you want to just go quickly through the announcements?
Yes, very quickly, just to remind that the 27th of October we will have a new office hour with Doug Johnson talking about BPM stuff, so activity and business process services. And just a reminder, second and last announcement about the BeeCon content. We enjoy a lot at the BeeCon, and the BeeCon content will be available soon in the BeeCon website, that is beacon.buzz. But we want to go faster to the content, and thank you, Ole, for being here, because we would like to see the great enhancement and changes of the Alfresco SDK 3.0 recently released from the team. And Ole is one of the people that designed and also developed some parts of it. So thank you, Ole. I leave you the microphone to show the technical stuff and the things around the Alfresco SDK.
Yep. So thank you for having me, and it's been a while since I've been on TikTok Live last. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen right away. You should be seeing it now. Go into the slides. So do you see my screen now?
Yes.
All right. So for you guys who were at BeeCon, first of all, it was good to see you, all of you. I did have to miss the Friday, so I didn't get to say goodbye to a lot of you folks, but it was really, really good to catch up with everyone. Today's session is going to be pretty much a repeat of the same demo and the same session that I did at BeeCon. So if you saw my session there, you're probably not going to learn a whole lot of new things, but it's always good to get a refresher, or maybe you couldn't see the things on the projector or whatnot, or you didn't get to ask that one question, so you do have that ability. So if you have any questions, fire them away on the YouTube chat or in the RC channel. You can go to chat.alfresco.com and ask your questions there, and Francesco will be monitoring that throughout the presentation. So Francesco already introduced me, so I'm Ole Hejlskov. I'm product manager for the developer platform. I look after APIs, SDKs, everything related to the developer persona. I also look after the application development framework, which is quite exciting. You can see my contact details here. I'm a very approachable and open guy, so if you ever want to have a chat about SDKs or APIs or app dev framework, just send me an email or hit me up on Twitter, and I'll be more than happy to have a conversation. So today's agenda, we want to just take you through a brief history on where we are with the SDK and how we got here. So we'll talk a little about that. We'll talk about the new features of the SDK, a little bit about the vision. Being a product manager, it's kind of my nature to set out a vision and a strategy for what's the problem we're trying to solve and who we're trying to solve it for. Then we want to move into talking about that Maven plugin, because with the SDK 3, it's a complete turnaround on how we do things and how people build their customizations. So everything is now encapsulated in the plugin. We want to talk about that. And then I really want to make sure we have enough time for a good demo and maybe some questions. So I'm hopeful that my demo will go as well as it did at BeeCon, because at BeeCon I was so lucky that all the demos just worked out beautifully. And that's something that, just going to knock on wood, I probably jinxed it now, but that rarely happens. So brief history. Back in 2009, we had Gab and Mauricio create like the first iteration of a Maven archetype and a Maven plugin for building AMP files for the repository, Alfresco repository, that is. And it was quite limited, but it did the basic thing of like handling the life cycle of building your customizations, compiling your code. It had a little bit around testing in there, but it was mostly focused around how you build an AMP file that you can deploy into your production environment. For me, it was quite an eye-opener coming from a world where we used AND and had like AND scripts to copy files into an exploded WAR file, and it was just a bit of a mess in terms of handling the whole life cycle. So it was really an eye-opener for me personally. Then in 2013, we had the Alfresco SDK 1.1.1, which is where Alfresco kind of like adopted it and started treating it as like a product that had some enhanced features. Like we had a first attempt at a remote unit test runner. It had some hot reloading support, and we started supporting Solar as well. Then a year later, we released the 2.0 release, and this is around the time where I got involved in the project as a contributor, and that was before I joined the company. And we wanted to like support the full stack, support share as well. We want to have better hot reloading. We want to release it on Maven Central just to like show the world that we're really serious about this product, and we're going to release it out into the public. We also started supporting Spring Loaded for hot reloading, which is a free alternative, and we had some regression testing and functional testing using Selenium in there. Then a short while after that, we realized we had some issues around the JVM and JDKs with the version, so we had to push out a 2.1 release. We also did a few enhancements to the hot reloading. We did a full documentation revamp, and then finally in 2016, we pushed out a 2.2 release to keep up with the Alfresco releases. Now, the biggest problem we have with the SDK so far has been that since it was created before Alfresco was even built with Maven, there's a lot of issues around the artifacts. So when you need to build a customization, you need to grab a lot of dependencies, and the Alfresco wasn't actually built with Maven fully until the 5.0 release. So getting all of these artifacts and making them available to Maven was a bit tricky. And we were still learning in that process, which meant that a lot of things changed throughout the release history. So from 4.1, a lot of things changed. 4.2, a lot of things changed. And then we had a complete overhaul in the 5.0 release. And again, some things changed in 5.1. It's kind of settled down now. But the impact of this is that the SDK is really having a hard time keeping up with these changes, because everything in Maven is based on XML configurations of plugins that does various things. And dealing with these sort of like, if we're on this version, we need to grab an artifact with this ID, it doesn't really work out that nicely. So we end up with a compatibility matrix that looks like this. And as you can see, it's clearly quite messy, to be honest. Like if you need to use repo 5.1.1 or 5.0.1, then you need to use like SDK 2.1.1 or 2.1.0, or it's just really a mess to figure all of this out. Which also meant that we've had to do some in-depth upgrade instructions, because we would have to change the archetypes in the POM files. So whenever you upgrade from one version of Alfresco to another, or you upgraded from one version of the SDK to the other, you end up with an upgrade page that looks like this. Now, the content on this page isn't really that interesting, but I just wanted to turn your attention to like the top right corner. This is the scroll bar. So on this page, this is a page we have in documentation. This shows you how to upgrade your all-in-one project from 2.1.1 to 2.2.0. And just looking at the size of this the scroll bar over here, you can see it is quite a long page. So lots of steps to go through it. And we really wanted to address that, because it was not sustainable. So with that, what is actually new in the SDK 3.0, sorry. So we set out a vision that we wanted to have compatibility. So we wanted to address how can we support multiple versions of the releases. We want to align to standards in terms of, well, with 5.1, we now support jar files. So if we flip the bucket and say, let's produce a jar file by default and then still support AMPs, but as an assembly, then everything seems to be a bit more Maven standards based. So instead of a source main AMP web, you would have source main resources. So the whole directory layout seems to be much more simplified. We also want to empower developers, so better hot reloading, better testing, that whole lifecycle management that we can help out with, that Maven does so well. We wanted to build on top of that and make it even better. And then we needed it to be configurable. One of the things one of the most requested things we've done in the SDK over and over again is that we have a resources plugin in the SDK. So whenever you compile or build a module, it will go in and it will try to do some substitutions inside the file. So you could have like $brackets, project dots, artifact ID or something like that, and you can have Maven go and replace some of these values. And we maintain in the SDK a list of these file extensions that it needs to do these replacements on. And believe it or not, we did some extractions on the amount of issues we've had, and that is the #1 most commented thing and most voted thing, and just overall the one we've had the most issues with. And this was again because we had like a parent POM where everything was defined, and it had to be controlled by us, or otherwise you'd have to go through some hoops to configure it yourself. So what I'm saying with all of this, we wanted to give that configuration, that flexibility into the hands of the developers, so you detach yourselves from the SDK in that regard. So talking a little bit more about these individual vision items, what it means. So SDK 3.0 is compatible with the 4.2 releases, the 5.0, 5.1, and now the Alfresco content services with the new rebranding and everything. So 5.2 releases. There is one caveat that if you're working on 4.2, you need to do one change in your module properties, and we will cover that later on, maybe if we have time. But there's just one little quirk that you need to cater for 4.2. Otherwise, everything just works as you'd expected. And switching between these versions and even additions is quite easy. So in your POM file, you have an Alfresco platform version, Alfresco share version, and Maven Alfresco edition. So if you wanted to run your project on a 5.0, you simply just change the platform and the share version, and then you can switch between community and enterprise as well. The upgrades between the SDK versions. So we don't have a parent POM anymore, and we'll see that when we go to the examples. But we do have a property, Alfresco SDK version, which will default to 3.0.0. So once we release the 3.0.1, which should be within the next couple of weeks, you simply go into your POM, you update and bump that version number, and that's it. That is all you need to do. So lots of good things around them.
Ole, just one question from the RC channel. What about the Spring Surf version?
The Spring Surf version, yeah. So you can still override that as a parameter. So yes, it's still available, and it is an issue with the 5.1 and the 5.2 releases, because it's missing from the platform distribution file. That we're actually moving away from that file, but it's causing a bit of issues because we do have a missing version. It is in there by default, the version number, and it is in the POM, so you can control that and control the version of it if you want to.
Okay, thank you. Before, in advance, as you can imagine, there are lots of questions around, but before, just a confirmation for the wall developers, please confirm that the Alfresco SDK is already available, so you can start using it. Okay.
I should probably have said that to begin with. We did release SDK 3.0 in the beginning of April. I can't remember the exact date. Maybe it was April 4th or April 3rd, but it was the beginning of April. So it's been around for a little over a month now.
Okay, so for the newbies that were not able to test the Alfresco SDK, is still available, and this is one relevant message, of course. Then probably you will show how to use it in practice. Then in the latest part of the presentation, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, sorry for interrupting you, but
no problem.
The interest is okay. Please go ahead.
All right. So. As I said, lots of good things around compatibility to support the different versions. we wanted to align to standards, and this has been something that's caused a lot of discussions. We've had a lot of good feedback on this. So as I said, with the 5.1 release, we support jar modules. So if you're using the installer, you actually have a directory called modules inside the Alfresco installation home. So if you go to Alf Home modules, you have a platform and a share directory, and you can just drop a jar file in there, and it will be loaded when you restart the Tomcats. So that's all good, and we wanted again to minimize the footprint and the impact the SDK has on your project. So in essence, you could actually just say that the SDK is nothing more but just some predefined dependencies set up, and then the Alfresco Maven plugin, which we'll go into more details around, will just help you start and test your customization. The actual building it and compiling it and everything is just purely standard Maven life cycles. So that will produce a jar file. And we've rearranged and really skimmed down the archetypes. So we still have all-in-one, but previously in the all-in-one, you would see a repo amp module, see a repo war module, a share amp, and a share war, and then a runner module, and again, there's probably a solar module as well. So you have 5 modules. In all-in-one today, we've trimmed all of that down, and now we have a platform jar and a share jar and an integration test, which you could omit if you wanted to, but we'll look at more on that later. So we've really trimmed down things into a more standards-based around jars. Another thing that we've got a lot of praise for is that we no longer have a parent POM, because everything's been moved into the Alfresco Maven plugin. So there's no need to inherit a parent POM. You can now use your company-wide one, which has been a feature that's been very much requested. It also means that there's no more profiles, so you can't do Maven clean -p purge. That one doesn't exist anymore. We'll talk more about that later, but instead you'll do Alfresco :run, and that will invoke the Maven plugin. So everything aligned around the jar, but we also realized that jars are, well, officially only supported from 5.1 and onwards, although they technically still will work on older releases. But in some instances, you still want to have an AMP file, and in that case, you there's pre-configured in your POM when you generate a new project. It will have everything you need to work with the Maven assembly plugin. So if you uncomment that, the Maven will actually create both your jar file and an AMP file with all the dependencies and everything it needs. So you would use this typically if you wanted to like override out-of-the-box resources, or if you wanted to bring in third-party dependencies. So that would be the use cases for it. A lot of times you could actually just get away with a jar file, but I know that's a bigger topic, but I'm just saying that capabilities is in there. And then again, if we go into the whole configuration and we wanted to give people more power, that whole assembly configuration is just available inside your project. So if you don't like the way the AMP is being built, well, you have full flexibility to control the assembly on how that AMP file is being built and what it contains and where things end up in there. So again, aligning to standards, pretty good thing. Empowering developers, so there's 2 big beats in here. We now support hot swap agent, which is based on DC EVM. We also support
sorry, Ole, a question from the IC channel where exactly about the AMP. So if the AMP are still supported, and you clearly described the behavior, also the assembly folder and configuration, it's great stuff because you can control everything. So this is another question from the IC.
I'm not sure I got the question, or was it just a comment?
No, the question where if the AMP are still supported with the new SDK, the answer is clearly yes.
Yes.
And you described a lot about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll show a bit of, if we have time in the demo, on how you do that. But I also produced a blog post, and we'll provide the links. I don't know, Francesco, when you can find the link to the blog post and paste that in the chat. I did a blog post on working with amps and then how we can bring in external amps and install them. And I did produce an example on how we could pull in the JavaScript console, because that's a nice, good example that I think is on everyone's mind on how can I use that. So amps fully supported, fully available. The only difference now is that it by default, it will produce a jar file, and there's a bit of configuration you just put in your palm, and then you have an AMP as well.
Okay, thank you. I will look in for the link.
Excellent. So hot reloading, as I said, we support the hot swap agent based on DCVM and JRebel. We also have some improved integration testing. So this was a contribution we got from Bindu, from SIA Consulting, and we're extremely grateful for that contribution. It did take us like 2 or 3 years to actually implement it and get it in there, and we didn't accept the pull request as is, but we did base everything on top of it. It's a bit complex on how it works, but I'll show you a demo, and we are working on some documentation on exactly how it works. But the main idea here is it allows you to execute tests on a running stack in using Maven, the Alfresco Maven plugin. So typically when you do integration tests, you would have to stop the repository and everything, and then start it up. And once it's started up, it will fire off all the tests and then shut it down again. Well, with this feature, you start it up once and you continue writing your code, and you can just execute the tests live against the repository. And it really provides a great hot reloading, save and refresh go. So empowering developers really really good thing. Configurable, we have around 40 different configuration parameters, some of them more valuable than others, but to give you some examples, you have full control. So as I said earlier, the Maven, Alfresco Maven plugin will essentially do 2 things. It will start up the Tomcat with a database and everything you need to test your customization, and it will also execute your integration tests. Actually, it doesn't execute the integration test themselves. It just makes sure that the repository and everything is up and running along with Solar, and the whole stack is up and running before the integration tests are executed. And that's pretty much all that the Maven plugin does, but we've made it extremely flexible, so you can easily tell it that you want it to enable platform, yes or no. Do you want to enable share, yes or no? Enable Solar, enable MySQL, enable Postgres. So if you want to use external databases, you can use the platform modules and share modules to install third-party modules, whether that be jar files or AMP files, yeah. And again, with the whole configuration where AMPs are still supported as an assembly, and you have that full control to configure how the AMPs are being built. So very configurable, and again, we're working on documentation to bring this into more light on what exactly you can do with it. So a little bit about the Alfresco Maven plugin. Any questions so far, Francesco?
No, I interrupt you with all the question. Of course, there is a discussion, but it's more a discussion than some question about the support. So the AMP dependencies, if we are using the Alfresco SDK 3, so nothing really changed since the previous version. So AMPs still has some issues and problems on dependencies if you are using also the SDK 3. So this is the reason why the suggestion is to migrate to the jar deployment. Are you okay? So do you agree with this? Which is your thoughts, Ole?
I would need to see the exact discussion just to dive into it, but it's not perfect. We do realize that, and there are some issues all around. Like if you have 2 different AMPs with different sets of the same dependencies in different versions, these kind of things. So it's not perfect, but at least it's the SDK will allow you to build these things in much more efficiently than we previously did.
In any case, this is more a discussion than a question, and of course, it's not something that we can discuss here. We will do later on, of course.
All right. I'll make sure to check the logs and engage in that discussion once we finish the presentation. So, anyways, picking up the speed a little bit, I want to make sure we get to the demo. I want to talk a bit about the Maven plugin. So I've already said this, that it handles running and testing your modules, installs third-party dependencies. It does start by default. If you use all-in-one, it will start the platform, Solar, Share, and the API Explorer. But you can also configure the plugin to deploy a custom WAR file. So if you have another project, a WAR file doing, I don't know, could be anything, you could actually deploy and configure that. 40 different configuration parameters, and the way you start everything up is you do Maven install, Alfresco run, and that's it. That's all you need to do, and then we'll start everything up and fetch the dependencies. So I wanted to go through a little bit on what it actually does behind the scenes. So when you do Alfresco run, the first thing it will do is it checks if Solr is enabled. Then we need to unpack the Solr config and do some replacements. So it needs to do some replacements around secure comms, so the certificates and everything, which is completely different on 4.2, 5.0, and 5.1. It's completely different packaging, and the files are in different locations. So that's a bit messy. It also makes sure that because on 4.2 you have to use Solr 1.4, and then 5.0, and later on it's Solr 4. So there's a lot of differences in the different ways it does this. But this is all hidden and wrapped inside the plugin. So if you say enable Solr, it will figure out, depending on the Alfresco platform version, which version of Solr to bring in. Then the next step is that it actually takes the Alfresco WAR file and it unzips it, and then we use the MMT module to install all the amps and installs the jar files, jar modules, and depending on the version, and like I said with the Solr, maybe we need to secure to comment out secure comms. We copy in the license, we copy in global properties, then we package up the WAR file and we install it in the local repository. Now, a lot of people are requesting that you want to be able to take that WAR file and deploy it. That is not something we do currently in the SDK 3.0, but since all of these steps are actually being done, it should be pretty easy to take this WAR file and attach it so you have it available in the target directory, and you can deploy it to your custom Nexus server. So that's something that is actively being worked on. Then it does the essentially the same thing with share. So it unpacks it, installs the dependencies, then copies over some log4j and share config custom. It checks if the port has been changed. So one of the things that was really tricky in the old SDK was if you wanted to run like an all-in-one on a different port, then you would be in a world of pain because you had to change a lot of different places. And now we actually just have one file where you can say Alfresco Maven Tomcat port. I can't remember on top of my head what it is. And that will actually look into all the different configuration files and set up the port correctly. So the repo will continue to run, the Solr will continue to run, and share everything will just work out of the box. So it hides away some of that configuration. Then the last thing is that if we need to start Tomcat again, you could just say all of this is optional. So maybe you want to control the Tomcat plugin yourself. In that case, you can do that. But if it is, then we add in some dependencies. We add some database drivers. Again, remember those configuration items, enable MySQL, enable Postgres, enable enterprise databases. It adds in these drivers for you. Then it adds the web apps and set up some paths and everything. Checks if we need to fork the process, yes or no, configure the port, and then we start it up. And that essentially gets you to the point where you have everything running with Solr, with share. At least if you're using all-in-one, you can still use the platform jar or share jar individual if you wanted to go down that route. So this one is probably not that readable, but it's just an example on how you could configure the Alfresco Maven plugin. So like it has a configuration section with enable H2, enable platform, enable Solr, share, API Explorer. We have a few module dependencies that we put in, and that's essentially it. That is the basic thing you need. So let's dive into a demo. All right. So I've cheated a little bit beforehand, and because we're a bit out of time, I'm just going to show this quickly. So if you want to, let me make this a bit bigger so everyone can read it.
In the case, Ole, I think that consider that we started later on, we can maintain our schedule. So
yeah, we can go a little bit. So
excellent. So take your time.
So the command you want to use is obviously you want to check. You have Java working, you have the latest Maven version. So I'm using 3.3.9. I always recommend that you go for the latest Maven version whenever you're working with this, because if you use some of the things that are in your Linux distribution, you tend to get older versions. And we have seen a lot of issues in the past with people using as old as 2.x on Maven, and that just doesn't work. We need the latest and the greatest. That's always a good thing.
Sorry, Ole, we have a question from the YouTube channel, and the question is that does the version of the platform and share should be the same For example, when we have the 5.2 F, I don't know if the F is released in the public repository. So in any case, the question is, does the version of the platform and share should be the same?
So that's probably more of a question for Richard Esplin, because he looks after exactly this this thing. The trick is that we don't technically have a support matrix saying that you can run share 5.2 with a repo 5.1. We do release them separately, and they are two separate packages, but as a rule of thumb, you want to go with the same share version as the same platform version you have.
So let me try, because I recently tried this, and because we are working together on the documentation side, also it depends on the version. So for example, as you all know, guys, if you are working with for example, the 4.2, not the 5 version, but the 4.2F that is still supported, you have to explicitly match the version of share and platform, but it depends also on naming that the platform and share has. So in case of 5.2, the naming are not strictly the same, so we have to find the compatibility matrix. Sorry to interrupt.
So in terms of the SDK, that's you actually don't have to worry about the naming and the artifact changes, because if you say I want to enable share and you tell it it's a share 4.2, the SDK will know which dependencies to bring in, so it should hide all of that away. But as a rule of thumb, you want to go with the same share version and platform version together. But technically, there's nothing stopping you from taking a repo 4.2 and a share 5.1 and launch that up, but your mileage may vary, because that's not a scenario that we test or support. So going back, once you've verified that you have Maven installed and you have Java installed, you want to run this command, and we have a nice getting started guide in the docs already that takes you through all of this. I just wanted to show it. So Maven archetype generate, and then you want to filter by org Alfresco. The reason you want to do this, if you don't, you'll get like 1,500 different archetypes to choose from, and you want to narrow that list down. So let me just execute this so you can see what happens. So as you can see, we have quite a few archetypes, but the most the thing that confuses people a lot is that they see Alfresco AMP archetype, and they still see the share AMP archetype, but also the share jar archetype and the platform jar archetypes, and only one all-in-one. So the reason for this is previously the archetypes in the 1.x and the 2.x releases of the SDK, the archetypes were called share AMP archetype. But now there's no longer an AMP archetype, it's more of a jar archetype. We changed the artifact ID, and because it's deployed to Maven Central, where all of this lives, we can't change things that have already been released. Once it's released to Maven Central, that's permanent. So if you, for example, we can try and check the share AMP, that will only be available in the 2.2 release. Whereas if we take the jar project, it will be available in the 3.0 release. Another way you could technically do this is you could actually filter this list by the version, but apparently there's a bug in Maven that stops you from doing this. So that's I was a bit disappointed by that, but in any case, so let's try and generate an all-in-one. So we can see that's number 2 for all-in-one, and now we can actually see it's available in a 3.0 release. On my machine, I obviously have like the latest development thing, so I have the 3.01 snapshot, but the 3.0 release will be available to everyone. So just create that, and we can say Fresco test package. Everything looks good. Yes, and that's it. Once you test, go in here, we can see we have like the share jar module, we have the platform jar module integration test, and we have the run bat and sh script. So you could just go in and say run the sh, and that will actually start everything up. I'm not going to use this freshly generated project in the interest of time, but as you can see, this is like it did in the past. It just sets up the Maven options, and then does Maven clean install Alfresco run, and that's it. So when we go into the one that I created earlier, so it has already all the dependencies and everything.
Ole, sorry, there is a an interesting but tricky question. It's a really interesting, it's very practical. So the scenario is that one developer from in the RC channel is saying, okay, I usually I use the SDK in the past and I usually create amps. Now, if I move to the SDK 3, first of all, the suggestion is to use the jar project instead of the amp. So as you are clearly say, do not use the amp artifact, but move to the jar artifacts. But will I be able to use the amp generated from the jar project and the jar artifact in the way I used with the previous version of the SDK? Did I explain the question?
Yeah. So first thing I want to clarify is that the share amp archetype are not available, and the repo amp archetype are not available in the 3.0 release version. So if you want to go with those, you will be constricted to the 2.2 releases or previous releases. If you go with the 3.0, again, I'll show examples of this, but you can build your amp files as well as your jar files with the 3.0 release. So let's have a look at that right away. So just wanted to show that the just gonna start this one up. So it does a clean. I forgot about that. So it will execute my unit test, and then we see it has a lot of output. And this is kind of deliberate because we do a lot of support and helping people because they have issues with the SDK, or they tried a certain configuration that didn't work as they expected to. So by having all of this output, it makes it much easier to help everyone and figure out what went wrong, because we can actually see all the paths, all the different versions, all the configuration items and everything. So it just makes it easier. The thing you want to do if you get stuck with the SDK and you want to create a bug report or get help on the forum, please include the whole output. So all the way up here from environment variables, scanning projects, until you get whatever error, if you get an error, because that really helps us try and debug what went wrong. So as you can see, it's starting up here. There's nothing special about it. I just wanted to show that it actually works. So while that is starting,
while we are waiting, we have one question more from YouTube. In SDK 3, we cannot produce Word files with Alfresco run, but it is going to be addressed in 3.0.1, so in the newest version, or not?
Yeah, so I can't promise that it will be in 3.01 because I think the release for that version is pretty much set at this point. But it's definitely something that's high on the list because I've had a lot of requests for it, and I also talked to a lot of people at BeeCon who requested this feature. So it's definitely something we're aware of, and we will be looking into how we can bring that up. We want to release more rapidly on the SDK, so we want to push out a 3.01 because there's a few bugs we've caught here and there. We want to address those, but also adding in new functionality like producing the WAR file and making that available. We want to make sure we get there. Another thing that we worked on during BeeCon was support for Solar 6, so we want to get that in as well. So lots of new features coming up. We just and we have the release vehicle for it and everything. So yeah, definitely that is something we're going to look into.
Okay, thank you.
So I just wanted to show that this is up and running. As zoomed in. So we have the Alfresco page up and running, and we have share and Solar's running as well. So that's all good. This is exactly as you would expect it. So let's try and go through the project here. So I'm just going to try and minimize this a little bit. I hope that the screen is readable. I tried to make the font bigger, but if we look at the root POM,
nice.
Good. So we have like the usual group ID, artifact ID, blah, blah, some descriptions, and we have some properties in here. So as I mentioned, we have Alfresco SDK version. This is just a property to control a plugin later on. But essentially, once we release the 3.0.1 release, the only thing you have to do is this, and you're done. You get the latest and the greatest. We set up like Alfresco data location. We've always done that. We need to set some properties for Solar Home and Data Deer, and then we have like the Alfresco platform version, Alfresco share version, edition, and those questions around the Alfresco surf version. We have that there as well. JRebel version, compiler source and target, and then we just bring in dependencies as you would on any normal Maven-based project. So we have some dependencies, some mocking, some HTTP components, yeah, just normal dependency management as you would expect. Then once we get into the build section, and again, this is all covered in that blog post that I mentioned earlier, but here we have a commented out section on amps. So if you want to build an amp, you essentially just go in and you add in, just remove the comments, and this will invoke the assembly plugin. So it'll just configure the assembly plugin that we need to build an amp file. We need to use this assembly file, which is part of your project. And we also need to bring in the Alfresco Maven plugin because it does a little bit of hooking in, mainly just to be able to call it .amp instead of .zip, but that's a small nuance. So that's all you need to do to create an amp. Now, if you're not happy with the way that amp file is created, you can simply just go into Alfresco platform, source main assembly, amp.xml, and this is where you have the control. Like you can go to the Maven assembly plugin. It's a very widespread plugin, lots of documentation around it, and you can customize how the amp file is being built. So full flexibility on how you do that. So actually, because there's so many questions around them, just wanted to shut this one down and just show that we can actually build an amp file as well as the jar file. So while that's shutting down, as I talked about the Maven resources plugin, you have this bit of configuration in here by default. So now instead of having to raise a ticket saying, oh, we need to add in like jar, TTF, EOT, WOOF, ICO, PSD, whatever you have the control to control this. You have the power to control this this list. Then when we scroll a bit further down, we get to the actual plugin configuration, and this was what I shared on the screen a bit earlier on the slides. But it has some comments just to give you an idea of what it's doing. So by default, we want to have H2 as an embedded database. We want to enable the platform, enable Solar, Share, API Explorer. We want to install Alfresco Share Services, which is an AMP file. We want to bring in the platform jar file, which we're building as part of this. And we also want to bring in the integration tests, and maybe we'll get back to that depending on how much time we do. And the same thing for Share. We can bring in the Share modules we need. Then we include default configuration for JRebel and some repositories so you can access Alfresco's our Nexus repositories, and that is it. So you don't need to be an expert of Maven. This is pretty simple and clean, straightforward. There's some properties, some dependencies, and some plugin configuration, and that is it. Whereas in the past, everything would be hidden away in the parent POM in these huge profiles with long XML files of POM configuration and definitions. So much cleaner. So I'm just going to do a Maven clean, and remember the only thing we've done on this project is to enable this assembly plugin. So we can just do package. I can't type today. There we go. So what this will do now is, because everything is jar by default, there's no way we can get around that, but we also told it to build the amp. So we can see here, if we scroll up a little bit, we can see, well, that's the share one. Let's look at the platform. So here we can see that it's building the platform jar module. So it does everything it needs to do, like compiles it and yada, yada, yada. Then it's building the jar file, but it's also building the amp file. So if we look at the target, TTL platform jar targets, we can actually see we have both a jar file and an AMP file, and you can take that AMP file and deploy that into to production. If your module has some dependencies for external things, if you're bringing in some libraries, those will also be included into the AMP file by default. And that's all controlled by the assembly configuration. So lots of good power and flexibility. All right, so just wanted to show a bit of the anatomy. Like I said, we've put the all-in-one projects on a diet and really trimmed it down. So again, as I said earlier, we had the repo AMP, repo war, share AMP, share war, and runner and solar. Well, now you only have the things that you would actually need. So you have a platform jar file, you have a share jar file, and an integration test module. And hopefully we can get to demo the integration test. So the platform jar file is, as you would expect, it has like source main test. We include like a simple unit test in there. We have source main Java, we have some Java code, source main resources, Alfresco extension, Alfresco module, and here we have like module properties. You can put in your Spring Beans, your models, everything as you would normally. But you also have meta-inf resources where you can put static assets. So that test HTML file will still be available through Tomcat and everything. So quite plain and simple. If you've ever created a jar using Maven, this is going to be straight standard as you would expect it to be. Now for share, surprise, surprise, this is going to be the exact same thing. We don't bundle any Java code in there by default. It has the assembly, we have source main resources, we have web extensions where we can put like web scripts and everything. Inside the meta-inf, we can put in the iCow templates and widgets and everything we have in terms of static resources. And again, just simple DR file, nothing special about it. For the integration tests, we hopefully we can see some demo of it, but it just includes like the basic demo component. So it just shows you how to get custom beans, how to get the service registry, and how you can do a search and everything. So that is all good. So one thing that we could try and do, so having the integration test and everything in here, we could just try and say, that's not the right way to do it. So we could just say Maven ops, Maven integration tests. So when this is running, it will actually go in and see if you have any integration tests, and unless you've explicitly told it not to, it will actually start up the repository, it will start up Solar, it will start up Share, then it will run the integration test against that running instance and then shut everything down again. So this is just going to take a couple of minutes, but this really just gives you that nice integration tests that you can run as part of your build and your CI. Do excuse me, I need to have a little bit to drink because my voice is breaking up a little bit.
No, don't worry. In the meantime, you have to know there is lots of discussion inside the RC channel, so lots of interest around the SDK, of course. Lots of discussion about how can we make it simple or make it different, but people is using it.
That's good.
So
that's good
fine.
to know.
Yeah.
So the command I executed here was just Maven integration tests and nothing else. I didn't invoke the Alfresco Maven plugin or anything, but we do have a bit of configuration that tells Maven to actually launch the repo before it starts executing integration tests. So it's just about started up here. The one cool thing to notice here is that we're not just previously we would have it would only spin up the Spring context that we would need to actually run the application and not the full web app. So you wouldn't have Solar available, you wouldn't have Share available, you wouldn't be able to do like a simple use any kind of external library to call a web script and actually test the end result when you invoke that web script. But now it actually launches up the entire stack that you would need, along with Solar and along with Share, and executes your test on top of that. So this was successful. We can see that it started up everything and then started executing the integration test, and we see some output from these tests, which is all good. And we can see the summary that it ran. So it had 5 tests. There was 0 failures, 0 errors, 0 skipped, and we see everything was good. So build success. There is, however, one odd thing that we haven't been able to pinpoint because it's not always consistent, but we do get a few of these no class def found error, but this comes after the build is successful. It has to do with the way Tomcat is shutting down, and we think there's maybe a resource leak in one of the dependencies that we're using to run this whole thing, but we're not quite sure what is going on because this no class def found error, this class is actually available on the class path, so we're not quite sure what's going on here, but we can ignore it for now, and we're investigating to see if we can figure it out. So anyways, the point of all this was that if you just do Maven integration test and nothing else, it will start up the repo, run the tests, and then shut everything down again. And the reason this works is if we go into the integration test module and look at the POM, we can actually see that it just does some basic configuration of the Maven failsafe plugin. So we want to execute it on verify or integration test, and then we bind the Alfresco IT goal into the pre-integration test. So that's just a bit of magic you want to have in here, and it's all pre-baked in and configured in everything. So we are running desperately out of time because we started late, but also because I've been talking.
No, but I think if you agree, Ole, we can have 10 minutes more, consider we started a few minutes in late.
That is it. I do need to go myself at some point, but so I did talk about having hot swap agent and JRebel support in here. So I just wanted to show off some of the capabilities we have around hot reloading. So I would say hot swap agent, it's a free and open source solution. It does offer you to reload your Java classes. It does actually quite well in terms of reloading the static assets as well. So we can actually show a nice demo of hot reloading things inside Share. And the things that it doesn't do, which is still a limitation, it doesn't do bean reloading because it doesn't look for beans in XML files. It only supports annotated beans, and we don't have a whole lot of annotated beans inside the whole repo. We are talking to the guys behind Hot Swap Agent and see if we can sponsor them to add this in. We did talk to them, and they said it wouldn't be that big of a deal in quotes. So it doesn't sound like this is a huge effort, but still effort. So if you want to see this, please go on the GitHub channel for Hot Swap Agent, and if we have enough people asking for it, then hopefully we can bully them into to do it. Otherwise, I'm hoping we could sponsor them some way. So I won't say that it's perfect. It is what I would classify as a bit wobbly. It works 9 out of 10 times. I have been able to, like, the last couple of times I've demoed it, it's been rock solid, and I haven't been able to see any issues with it. But I know that people are struggling a little bit because sometimes you can see that it detects a change, but it doesn't actually it doesn't do anything. So I'm not sure what's up with that, but that is something that's outside of our control because the whole hot swap is completely delegated into Hot Swap Agent and DCVM. In terms of installing this, we will be providing a tutorial and some documentation around installing it. If you go to hotswapagent.github.io, I believe the page is, you can also find some instructions there. It is a bit tricky because you need to go and find the right version of DC EVM and the right version of Hot Swap Agent that is compatible with the JDK version that you have on your machine, because essentially it patches the JVM and the JDK to allow these things. Whereas if you wanted to purchase JRebel or you already have that will just work out of the box. That is just an agent you provide. So When you have all of that installed, you just do like Maven ops, you give it a few parameters, and you point the Java agent to the hot swap agent file, and then we do Maven install Alfresco run. So I'm just going to leave that. And the first way you can see that it's actually running here is that one of the first lines will be hot swap agent loading, blah, blah, blah. And one thing you'll notice is that it outputs a lot of debug information. We did this on purpose. There's a way to turn it off, and I'll show that in just a second. But the trick is that while you're working with all this and making sure that everything is working and getting it set up and everything, it's just nice to have that output to verify that hot swap agent is working, that it is pinging up the changes, that it can actually see that you changed your files, especially when you're trying to import your project into Eclipse or into IntelliJ or something else. You want to make sure that whatever shortcut or thing you're doing from within the IDE that actually triggers something that hot swap agent is picking up. I would say out of the box, it just seems to work. We've tested this on Linux, on Windows, and on Mac, and it's all quite nice. But as you can see, it does output a lot of debug information. So the way you can remove this is if you go into the root of your project, you'll see a source directory. So source test resources, you can find a hot swap agent properties for share and for the platform. And the plugin, the Maven plugin, will make sure to copy all of this in. So it just by default sets up some sensible defaults on pick up from these classes and these class paths and everything. So it sets everything up. But the main thing here is you have this logger for this log4j logger.org hot swap agent, and it's set to debug. You could set it to a more higher level so you don't get all of this this output. But we've kept it in there because it helps you get things up and running. So I'm just going to wait for this to start up, which should be any minute now.
In the meantime, the discussion continuing in the RC channel and the YouTube channel, but we are all seeing at the result in your demo, Ole.
Right, so we have it up and running, and in here we have a sample Hello World web scripts. We've been bundling this sample web script for a long time, and we really haven't changed it. We just wanted to make sure that it's in there so it shows you where to put your own files and everything. But it actually has the advantage that it's bringing in both a JavaScript controller and a Java controller. So let's try and change that, and hopefully the demo guards will be with us today, so everything works. So inside our platform jar file, we go to source main Java, and we have a Hello World web script. So we can try and say so we do some changes from IntelliJ, and I want to go up and say build projects. And it's built, so let's check the terminal. The thing you want to look for is this reloading class, and that tells you that it has reloaded the class that you compiled. So in this case, I know that this change will be in effect. But if you're debugging and troubleshooting, can't figure out what's going on here, you want to go in and look at this output. And if you don't see this refreshing and flushing and reloaded class, then it didn't pick it up for whatever reason. And that is not something we can do. We can help you with in the SDK. That is something in hot swap agent. So you would need to get some support from these guys. Obviously, we can try and help you, but usually start and stop it again. That's worked for me every single time. So I refreshed it, and now we got some changes, which is quite nice. We could also try and go in and find the our script controller. Actually, let's do the free marker. So free marker, and I just it's on the Mac. It's Command F9 to build it. So I already did that, and we can see did it detect some modify, and hopefully this just worked. That is awesome. So let's just get rid of this and try the JavaScript controller as well. Pushing my luck because I didn't test all of these, and it actually worked. So that is quite powerful. Let me just revert these changes again. So Build it. We get back to the original output. So hot reloading, we've just seen that we can do this in free market templates, in server-side JavaScript, and even the Java classes. Now, you could do like some basic things if you started everything up in debug mode. You could change everything, but you couldn't like add new methods. So we could just say string text. Oops. So we can just try and say, so we just quickly created a new method, and it's just returning hello from a new method. I'll go up to build projects. And then you can see it did reload the class, and it flushed it and everything. That's good. So we can just continue working our class, which is extremely powerful. Just going to revert this again. So the good thing about all of this is it gives you a nice save and refresh kind of feel to it, which is extremely powerful for developers all around. The last thing I wanted to show is the integration tests. So I've already shown you that I could just do Maven integration test, and it starts everything up and then shuts it down again. Well, if you have it running in the background and we launch up a new terminal, let's just do this. So we have a new one in here. We could just say Maven integration test. So what this actually does is it will obviously compile everything, and that did not work. It didn't work because the tests, yeah, that is why we have test that checks the output of the hello world web script, and now we've just modified it, which is bit annoying. Hello from Java. There was a space in there. All right, so it builds, compiles everything, then it gets to the tests, and the thing we can see here is that it does a check to see if Tomcat is already running on port 8080. Now, this is not statically configured in there. It actually checks if you've changed the port and everything, but if it detects that something is already running, it doesn't start it again, so it will just execute against the running instance. So here we can see that the build was 10 seconds, which is awesome. So you could just like keep compiling and everything, and all is good. But this also works from your IDE. So if we go into the integration tests, source test Java, and we want to take this demo component. And this is, I think I showed this earlier, some basic things. We're working on documentation around all of this, but we essentially tell it to run with an Alfresco test runner, which is a class that we provide as part of the SDK. Then we do an annotation to say remote run against this this location. So this is where you can find Alfresco, and then you extend an abstract Alfresco IT class that we have. And because that gives you some convenience methods of like getting the service registry and getting the application context. So that's quite good. And we have two tests in here. So it will get like the custom bean we have in this project. So DKO high demo component. And we do some asserts around that. And then we have another one where we're just getting the getting company home, and we do a child count on company home and expect that always be 7. So quite basic tests, but the very powerful thing again is that this runs on top of the full stack along with Solar and everything. So if I just right click and say run this test, we should get some output directly, and we can see it executed 2 tests and they're both successful, which is quite awesome. The same thing works in Eclipse. You just right click and say run as JUnit something something, you get like the exact same thing. So if the demo guards are with me, I'm just going to try and change this. So by default, we'll always have 7 folders in company home on a fresh database. I'm now going to say that we expect to have 10. So I'm just going to compile the class, and fingers crossed, reload it, and we have some tests that failed. So we could see that we expected 10, but we got 7, which is exactly right. So we're just going to change it back again. do a compile, and we can rerun the tests. And now we have a passing test. So
Okay.
this means that I can just go in, I can change my tests, I can keep writing new tests, I can add in new beans, I can add in new classes, new methods, and refactor my code and just keep running my tests against the running instance. It's extremely powerful and good. The last thing I wanted to show was that the same thing applies for share as well, but we are out of time and I do need to go pretty soon. So I think I'm just going to end the demo there and then say that it's quite powerful. I'm quite keen to hear feedback from people who are using it. If you have questions, ping on the IC channel or hit me up with an email, raise an issue on GitHub. I'm always up for discussing something about the
and probably, Ole, we could also set up a second part of the SDK discussion and demo in another Tech Talk Live. If you are available, of course, we could do not this month, but probably soon. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm all up for that. So if there is enough interest in it, I'm more than happy to do another event and just do demos and do some hacking and show some more advanced use cases. We can totally do that. Why don't Francisco, I don't know what the best way is. Maybe we create a topic in community.alfresco.com or something just to get some discussion going on it, because I would like to know what you would like to see, what the audience likes to see, and because I could entertain about this for a full day. So I just need to know what topics to cover and what you would like to see, and then that would be
correct. Probably it's correct to set up a sort of poll or something to see where to discuss more and what to discuss more in detail, because the overview is done now. We should discuss about details. In any case, I don't know if you want to complete. Otherwise, I close the session. What do you think?
Were there any questions towards the end?
At the moment, I also sent a reminder to both the channel, YouTube and RC, no more question, even if I have to say that the discussion is very high. People are talking about the AMPs, the best practice. So, I mean, lots of interesting discussion around it.
All right. Well, let's end it here. Do apologize for starting late and going late. We had some technical issues in the beginning, so but it's all good. I hope you enjoyed it. And again, if you have any questions, ping me on Twitter, Skype, RC, raise an issue on GitHub, send me an email, or reach out to Francesco. We're both very approachable, and we want to hear that feedback from you guys.
Okay, thank you again, guys. So I stop here the broadcast. Sorry for the technical inconvenience, but everything is recorded. So I hope that will be fine and easy to reach this video registration. Really interesting about the Alfresco SDK. Thank you very much for attending that webinar. We will see you next time, of course, next month. Bye, guys.
Bye.